Oh, sorry everyone, I just noticed that my volume was coming in the wrong input, so I apologize if it's been somewhat quiet up till now, but it should be better. Behind me was the sea. In front, the anchorage. The sea breeze, as though it had the sooner blow itself out of its unusual violence, was already at an end. It had been succeeded by light, variable airs from the south and southeast, carrying great banks of fog, and the anchorage, under lee of Skeleton Island, lay still and leaden as when first we entered. The Hispaniola in that unbroken mirror was exactly portrayed from the truck to the waterline, the Jolly Roger hanging from her peak. Alongside lay one of the jigs, silver in the stern sheets. Him I could always recognize, while a couple of men were leaning over the stern bulwarks, one of them with a red cap, the very rogue that I had seen some hours before stride legs upon the palisade. Apparently they were talking and laughing, though at this distance, upwards of a mile, I could, of course, hear no word of what was said. All at once there began the most horrid, unearthly screaming, which at first startled me badly, though I had soon remembered the voice of Captain Flint, and even though I could make out the bird by her bright plumage as she sat perched upon her master's wrist. Soon after, the jolly boat shoved off and pulled for shore, and the man with the red cap and his comrade went below by the cabin companion. Just about that same time, the sun had gone down behind the spyglass, and as the fog was collecting rapidly, it began to grow dark in earnest. I saw I must lose no time if I would find the boat that evening. The white rock, visible enough above the brush, was still some eighth of a mile further down the spit, and it took me a goodish while to get up with it, crawling, often on all fours, among the scrub. Night had almost come when I laid my hand on its rough sides. Right below it there was an exceedingly small hollow of green turf, hidden by banks and a thick centre of the dell. Oh, and a thick, exceeding underwood, about knee-deep, that grew there very plentifully, and in the centre of the dell, sure enough, a little tent of goat skins, like what the gypsies carry about with them in England. I dropped into the hollow, lifted the side of the tent, and there was Ben Gunn's boat, homemade, if ever anything was homemade, a rude, lopsided framework of tough wood, and stretched upon that a covering of goat skin, with the hair inside. The thing was extremely small, even for me, and I could hardly imagine that it could have floated with a full-sized man. There was one thwart set as low as possible, a kind of stretcher in the bows, and a double paddle for propulsion. I had not then seen a coracle, such as the ancient Britons made, but I had seen one since, and I can give you no fairer idea of Ben Gunn's boat than by saying it was the first and the worst coracle ever made by man. But the great advantage of the coracle it certainly possessed, for it was exceedingly light and portable. Well, now that I had found the boat, you would have thought I'd have enough of truanity for once. In the meantime, I had taken another notion, and become so obstinately fond of it, that I would have carried it out, I believe, in the teeth of Captain Smollett himself. This was to slip out under cover of the night, cut the Hispaniola adrift, and let her go ashore where she fancied. I had quite made up my mind that the mutineers, after their repulse of the morning, had nothing nearer to their hearts than to up anchor and away to sea. This, I thought, it would be a fine thing to prevent, and now that I had seen how they left their watchman unprovided with a boat, I thought it might be done with little risk. Down I sat to wait for darkness, and made a hearty meal of biscuit. It was a night out of 10,000 for my purpose. The fog had now buried all heaven, As the last rays of daylight dwindled and disappeared, absolute blackness settled down on Treasure Island. And when, at last, I shouldered the coracle and groped my way stumblingly out of the hollow where I had supped, there was but 2 points visible on the whole anchorage. One was the great fire on shore, by which the defeated pirates lay carousing in the swamp. The other, a mere blur of light upon the darkness, indicated the position of the anchored ship. She had swung round to the ebb. Her bow was now towards me. The only lights on board were in the cabin, and what I saw was merely a reflection of the fog, of the strong rays that flowed from the stern window. Oh, on the fog. The ebb had already run some time, and I had to wade through a long belt of swampy sand, where I sank several times above the ankle, before I came to the edge of the retreating waters, and, waiting a little way in, with some strength and dexterity, set my coracle, keel downwards, on the surface. Chapter 23. The Ebb Tide Runs. The coracle, as I had ample reason to know before I was done with her, was a very safe boat for a person of my height and weight, both buoyant and clever in a sea way, but she was the most cross-grained, lopsided craft to manage. Do as you pleased, she always made more leeway than anything else, and turning round and round was the maneuver she was best at. Even Ben Gunn himself has admitted that she was queer to handle till you knew her way. Certainly I did not know her way. She turned in every direction but the one I was bound to go. The most part of the time we were broadside on, and I am very sure that I never should have made the ship at all, but for the tide. By good fortune, paddle as I pleased, the tide was still sweeping me down, and there lay the Hispaniola right in the fair way, hardly to be missed. First she loomed before me like a blot of something yet blacker than darkness, and then her spars and hull began to take shape, and the next moment, as it seemed, for the further I went the brisker grew the current of the ebb, I was alongside of her hawser and had laid hold. The hawser was as taut as a bowstring, so strong she pulled upon her anchor, all around the hull in the blackness. The rippling current bubbled and chattered like a little mountain stream. One cut with my sea gully, and the Hispaniola would go humming down the tide. So far so good. But it next occurred to my recollection that a taut hawser suddenly cut is a thing as dangerous as a kicking horse. 10 to 1, if I were so foolhardy as to cut the Hispaniola from her anchor, I and the coracle would be knocked clean out of the water. This brought me to a full stop, and if fortune had not again particularly favored me, I should have had to abandon my design. But the light airs, which had begun blowing from the southeast and south, had hauled round after nightfall into the southwest. Just while I was meditating, a puff came, caught the Hispaniola, and forced her up into the current, and to my great joy I felt the hawser slacken in my grasp, and the hand by which I held it dip for a moment under water. With that I made my mind up, took out my gully, opened it with my teeth, and cut one strand after another till the vessel only swung by 2. Then I laid quiet, waiting to sever these last, where the strain should be once more lightened by a breath of wind. All this time I had heard the sound of loud voices from the cabin, but, to say truth, my mind had been so entirely taken up with other thoughts that I had scarcely given ear. Now, however, when I had nothing else to do, I began to pay more heed. One I recognized for the coxswain's real hands, that had been Flint's gunner in former days. The other was, of course, my friend of the red nightcap. Both men were plainly the worse of drink, and they were still drinking. For, even while I was listening, one of them, with a drunken cry, opened the stern window and threw out something, which I divined to be an empty bottle. But they were not only tipsy, It was plain that they were furiously angry. Oaths flew like hailstones, and every now and then there came forth such a explosion as I thought was sure to end in blows. But each time the quarrel passed off, and the voices grumbled lower for a while, until the next crisis came, and, in its turn, passed away without result. On shore I could see the glow of the great campfire burning warmly through the shoreside trees. Someone was singing, a dull, old, droning sailor's song, with a droop and a quarter at the end of every verse, and seemingly no end to it, but the patience of the singer. I had heard it on the voyage more than once, and remembered these words: "But one man of her crew alive, what put to sea with 75." And I thought it was a ditty rather too dolefully appropriate for a company that had met such cruel losses in the morning. But indeed, from what I saw, all of these buccaneers were as callous as the sea they sailed on. At last the breeze came. The schooner sidled and drew nearer in the dark. I felt the hawser slacken once more, and with a good, tough effort cut the last fibers through. The breeze had but little action on the coracle, and I was almost instantly swept against the bows of the Hispaniola. At the same time, the schooner began to turn upon her keel, spinning slowly end for end across the current. I wrought like a fiend, for I expected every moment to be swamped. And since I found I could not push the coracle directly off, I now shoved straight astern. At length I was clear of my dangerous neighbour, and just as I gave the last impulsion, my hands came across a light cord that was trailing overboard across the stern bulwarks. Instantly I grasped it. Why I should have done so I could hardly say. It was at first a mere instinct, but once I had it in my hands and found it fast, curiosity began to get the upper hand, and I determined I should have one look through the cabin window. I pulled in hand over hand on the cord, and when I judged myself near enough, rose at infinite risk to about half my height, and thus commanded the roof and a slice of the interior of the cabin. By this time the schooner and her little consort were gliding pretty swiftly through the water. Indeed, we had already fetched up level with the campfire. The ship was talking, as sailors say, loudly, treading the innumerable ripples with an incessant weltering splash, and until I got my eye above the windowsill, I could not comprehend what the watchman had taken no alarm. One glance, however, was sufficient, and it was only one glance that I durst take from that unsteady skiff. It showed me Hans and his companion locked together in deadly wrestle, each with a hand upon the other's throat. I dropped upon the thwart again, none too soon, for I was near overboard. I could see nothing for the moment but these two furious and crimsoned faces swaying together under the smoky lamp, and I shut my eyes to let them grow once more familiar with the darkness. The endless ballad that had come to its end, and the whole diminished company about the campfire had broken into the chorus I had heard so often. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. Drink and the devil had done for the rest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. I was just thinking how busy drink and the devil were at that very moment in the cabin of the Hispaniola, when I was surprised by a sudden lurch of the coracle. At the same moment she yawned sharply and seemed to change her course. The speed, in the meantime, had simply increased. I opened my eyes at once. All around me were little ripples, combing over with a sharp, bristling sound, and slightly phosphorescent. The Hispaniola herself, a few yards to whose wake I was still being whirled along, seemed to stagger in her course, and I saw her spars toss a little against the blackness of the night. Nay, as I looked longer, I made sure she was also wheeling to the south land. I glanced over my shoulder. and my heart jumped against my ribs. There, right behind me, was the glow of the campfire. The current had turned at right angles, sweeping round along with it the tall schooner and the little dancing coracle, ever quickening, ever bubbling higher, ever muttering louder. It went spinning through the narrows for the open sea. Suddenly, the schooner in front of me gave a violent yaw, turning, perhaps, through 20 degrees, and almost at the same moment, one shout followed another from on board. I could hear feet pounding on the companion ladder, and I knew that the two drunkards had at last been interrupted in their quarrel and awakened to a sense of their disaster. I lay down flat in the bottom of that wretched skiff and devoutly recommended my spirit to its maker. At the end of the straits I made sure that we must fall into some bar of raging breakers where all my troubles would be ended speedily, and though I could, perhaps, bear to die, I could not bear to look upon my fate as it approached. So I must have lain for hours, continually beaten to and fro upon the billows, now and again wetted with flying spray, and never ceasing to expect death at the next plunge. Gradually weariness grew upon me. A numbness, an occasional stupor fell upon my mind, even in the midst of my terrors, until sleep at last supervened. And in my sea-tossed coracle I lay and dreamed of home and the old Admiral Benbow. Chapter 24. The Cruise of the Coracle. It was broad day when I awoke, and found myself tossing at the southwest end of Treasure Island. The sun was up, but was still hid from me behind the great bulk of the spyglass, which, on this side, descended almost to the sea in formidable cliffs. Haulbowline Head and Mizzenmast Hill were at my elbow, the hill bare and dark, the head bound with cliffs 40 or 50 feet high, and fringed with great masses of fallen rocks. I was scarce a quarter of a mile to seawards, and it was my first thought to paddle in and land. The notion was soon given over. Among the fallen rocks the breakers spouted and bellowed. Loud reverberations, heavy sprays flying and falling, succeeded one another from second to second, and I saw myself, if I ventured nearer, dashed to death upon the rough shore, or spending my strength in vain to scale the beetling crags. Nor was that all, for crawling together on flat tables of rock, or letting themselves drop into the sea with loud reports, I beheld huge, slimy monsters, soft snails, as it were, of incredible bigness, 2 of them, 2 or 3 score of them together, making the rocks to echo with their barkings. I have understood since that they were sea lions and entirely harmless, but the look of them, added to the difficulty of the shore and the high running of the surf, was more than enough to disgust me of that landing place. I felt willing rather to starve at sea than to confront such perils. In the meantime, I had a better chance, as I supposed, before me. North of Harbourline Head, the land runs in a long way, leaving at low tide a long stretch of yellow sand. To the north of that, again, there comes another cape. Cape of the Woods, as it was marked upon the chart, buried in tall green pines, which descended to the margins of the sea. I remembered what Silver had said about the current that sets northward along the whole west coast of Treasure Island, and seeing from my position that I was already under its influence, I preferred to leave Haulbowline Head behind me and reserve my strength for an attempt to land upon the kinder-looking Cape of the Woods. There was a great smooth swell upon the sea, the wind blowing steadily and gentle from the south. There was no contrariety between that and the current, and the billows rose and fell unbroken. Had it been otherwise, I must have long ago perished. But as it was surprising how Easily and securely my little and light boat could ride. Often, as I still lay at the bottom and kept no more than an eye about the gunwale, I could see a big blue summit heaving close above me, yet the coracle would but bounce a bit, dance as if on springs, and subside on the other side into the trough, as light as a bird. I began after a little to grow very bold, and sat up to try my skill at paddling. But even a small change in the disposition of the weight will produce violent changes in the behavior of a coracle, and I had hardly moved before the boat, giving up at once her gentle dancing movement, ran straight down a slope of water so steep that it made me giddy, and stuck her nose with a spout of spray deep into the side of the next wave. I was drenched and terrified, and fell instantly back into my old position, whereupon the coracle seemed to find her head again, and led me as softly as before among the billows. It was plain she was not to be interfered with. And at that rate, since I could in no way influence her course, what hope had I left of reaching land? I begun to be horribly frightened, but I kept my head for all that. First, moving with all care, I gradually bailed out the coracle with my sea-cap, and then, getting my eye once more above the gunwale, I set myself to study how it was that she managed to slip so quietly through the rollers. I found each wave, instead of the big, smooth, glossy mountain it looks from shore or from a vessel's deck, was for all the world like any range of hills on the dry land, full of peaks and smooth places and valleys. The coracle, left to herself, turning from side to side, threaded, so to speak, her way through these lower parts, and avoided the steep slopes and higher, toppling summits of the wave. Well now, I thought to myself, it is plain I must lie where I am, and not disturb the balance, but it is plain also that I can put the paddle over the side, and from time to time, in smooth places, give her a shove or two towards land. No sooner had that thought been, no sooner thought upon than done. There I lay on my elbows in the most trying attitude, and every now and again gave a weak stroke or two to turn her head to shore. It was very tiring and slow work, and yet I did visibly gain ground, and as we drew near the cape of the woods, though I saw I must infallibly miss that point, I had still made some 100 yards of easting. I was indeed close in. I could see the cool, green treetops swaying together in the breeze, and I felt sure I should make the next promontory without fail. It was high time, for I now begun to be tortured with thirst. The glow of the sun from above, its thousandfold reflection from the waves, the sea water that fell and dried upon me, caking my very lips with salt, combined to make my throat burn and my brain ache. The sight of the trees so near at hand had almost made me sick with longing, but the current had soon carried me past the point, and, as the next reach of the sea opened out, I beheld a sight that changed the name of my thoughts. Right in front of me, not half a mile away, I beheld the Hispaniola under sail. I made sure, of course, that I should be taken, but I was so distressed for want of water that I scarce knew whether to be glad or sorry at the thought. And long before I had come to a conclusion, surprise had taken entire possession of my mind, and I could do nothing but stare and wonder. The Hispaniola was under her mainsail and 2 jibs, and the beautiful white canvas shone in the sun like snow or silver. When I first sighted her, all her sails were drawing. She was lying a course about northwest, and I presume the men on board were going round the island on their way back to the anchorage. Presently she began to fetch more and more to the westward, so that I thought that they had sighted me and were going about me in chase. At last, however, she fell right into the wind's eye, was taken dead aback, and stood there a while, helpless, with the sail shivering. "Clumsy fellows," said I. They must still be drunk as owls. And I thought how Captain Smollett would have set them skipping. Meanwhile, the schooner gradually fell off and filled again upon another tack, sailed swiftly for a minute or so, and then brought up once more, dead in the wind's eye. Again and again this was repeated, to and fro, up and down, north, south, east, and west. The Hispaniola sailed by swoops and dashes, and at each repetition ended as she had begun, with idly flapping canvas. It became plain to me that nobody was steering, and if so, where were the men? Either they were dead drunk, or had deserted her, I thought. Or perhaps if I could get on board I might return the vessel to her captain. The current was bearing coracle and schooner southwards at an equal rate. As far as the latter's sailing, it was so wild and intermittent, and she hung each time so long in irons, that she certainly gained nothing, if she did not even lose. I dared not sit up and paddle. Oh, if only I dared to sit up and paddle, I made sure that I could overhaul her. The scheme had an air of adventure that inspired me, and the thought of the water breaker beside the fore companion doubled my growing courage. Up I got, was welcomed almost immediately by another cloud of spray, but this time stuck to my purpose, and set myself, with all my strength and caution, to paddle after the unsteered Hispaniola. Once I shipped a sea so heavy that I had to stop and bail, with my heart fluttering like a bird. But gradually I got in the way of the thing and guided my coracle along among the waves, with every now and then a blow upon her bows and a dash of foam in my face. I was now gaining rapidly on the schooner. I could see the brass glisten on the tiller as it banged about, and still no soul appeared upon her decks. I could not choose but suppose that she was deserted. If not, the men were lying drunk below, where I might batten them down, perhaps, and do what I chose with the ship. For some time she had been doing the worst thing possible for me, standing still. She headed nearly due south, yawing, of course, all the time. Each time she fell off her sails, partly filled, and then these brought her in a moment right to the wind again. I have said this was the worst thing possible for me, for helpless as she looked in this situation, with this canvas cracking like cannon, and the blocks trundling and banging on the deck, she still continued to run away from me, not only with the speed of the current, but by the whole amount of her leeway, which was naturally great. But now, at last, I had my chance. The breeze fell for some seconds, very low, and the current gradually turning her, the Hispaniola revolved slowly round her center, and at last presented me her stern, with the cabin window still gaping open, and the lamp over the table still burning, on into the day. The mainsail hung drooped like a banner. She was stock still, but for the current. For the last little while, I had even lost, but now redoubling my efforts, I began once more to overhaul the chase. I was not 100 yards from her when the wind came again in a clap. She filled on the port tack and was off again, stooping and skimming like a swallow. My first impulse was one of despair, but my second was towards joy. Round she came until she was broadside onto me, round still until she had covered half, and then 2/3, and then 3/4 of the distance that separated us. I could see the waves boiling white under her forefoot. Immensely tall she looked to me from my low station in the coracle. And then, of a sudden, I began to comprehend. I had scarce time to think, scarce time to act and save myself. I was on the summit of one swell when the schooner came stooping over the next. The bowsprit was over my head. I sprang to my feet and leaped, stamping the coracle under water. With one hand I caught the jib boom, while my foot was lodged between the stay and the brace, and as I still clung on there panting, a dull blow told me the schooner had charged down upon and struck the coracle, and that I was left without retreat on the Hispaniola. Chapter 25. I Strike the Jolly Roger. I had scarce gained a position on the bowsprit when the flying jib flapped and filled upon the other tack with a report like a gun. The schooner trembled to her keel under the reverse. The next moment, the other sails still drawing, the jib flapped back again and hung idle. This had nearly tossed me out into the sea, and now I lost no time, crawled back along the bowsprit, and tumbled head foremost on the deck. I was on the lee side of the forecastle, and the mainsail, which was still drawing, concealed from me a certain portion of the after deck. Not a soul was to be seen. The planks, which had not been swabbed since the mutiny, bore the print of many feet, and an empty bottle, broken by the neck, tumbled to and fro like a live thing in the scuppers. Suddenly the Hispaniola came right into the wind. The jibs behind me cracked aloud, the rudders slammed to, the whole ship gave a sickening heave and shudder, and at the same moment the main boom swung inboard, the sheet groaning in the blocks, and showed me the lee after deck. There were the two watchmen, sure enough, Redcap on his back, as stiff as a handspike, with his arms stretched out like those of a crucifix, and his teeth showing through his open lips. His real hands propped against the bulwarks, his chin on his chest, his hands hung open before him on the deck, lying open before him upon the deck. His face was white under its tan as a tallowed candle. For a while the ship kept bucking and siding like a vicious horse, the sails filling, now on one tack and now on another, and the boom swinging to and fro until the mast groaned aloud under the strain. Now and again, too, there came a cloud of light spray over the bulwark, and a heavy blow on the ship's bows again, and the swell so much heavier, whether it was made of it by this great-rigged ship than by the homemade lopsided coracle, now gone to the bottom of the sea. At every jump of the schooner, Redcap slipped to and fro, but, what was ghastly to behold, neither his attitude nor his fixed teeth-disclosing grin was any way disturbed by this rough usage. At every jump, too, hands appeared still more to sink into himself and settle down upon the deck, his feet sliding ever the farther out, and the whole body canting toward the stern, so that his face became, little by little, hid from me. Oh, come on, page. Okay, there it is. And at last I could see nothing beyond his ear and the frayed ringlet of one whisker. At the same time I observed around both of them splashes of dark blood upon the planks, and began to feel sure that they had killed each other in their drunken wrath. While I was thus looking and wondering, in a calm moment, when the ship was still, his real hands turned partly round, and with a low moan writhed himself back to the position in which I had seen him first, the moan which told of pain and deadly weakness, and the way in which his jaw hung open went right to my heart. But when I remembered the talk I'd overheard from the apple barrel, all pity left me. I walked aft till I reached the mainmast. "Come aboard, Mr. Hands," I said ironically. He rolled his eyes round heavily, but he was too far gone to express surprise. All he could do was to utter one word. "Brandy!" It occurred to me there was no time to lose, and dodging the boom as it once more lurched across the deck, I slipped aft and down the companion stairs into the cabin. It was such a scene of confusion as you could hardly fancy. All the lock-fast places had been broken open in quest of the chart. The floor was thick with mud, where ruffians had sat down to drink or consult after wading in the marshes around their camp. The bulkheads, all painted in clear white and beaded round with gilt, bore a pattern of dirty hands. Dozens of empty bottles clinked together in corners to the rolling of the ship. One of the doctor's medical books lay open on the table. Half the leaves gutted out, I suppose, for pipe lights. In the midst of all this, the lamp still cast a smoky glow, obscure and brown as umber. I went into the cellar. All the barrels were gone, and of the bottles a most surprising number had been drunk out and thrown away. Certainly, since the mutiny began, not a man there could ever have been sober. Foraging about, I found a bottle with some brandy left for Hans, and for myself I routed out some biscuit, some pickled fruits, a great bunch of raisins, and a piece of cheese. With these I came on deck, put down my own stock behind the rudder-head, and went out of the coxswain's reach. And well out of the coxswain's reach. Went forward to the water breaker, and had a good deep drink of water. And then, and not till then, gave Hans the brandy. He must have drunk a gill before he took the bottle from his mouth. "Aye," said he, "by thunder, but I wanted some of that." I had sat down already in my own corner and begun to eat. "Much hurt?" I asked him. He grunted, or rather I might say he barked. "If that doctor were aboard," he said, "I'd be right enough in a couple of turns, but I don't have no manner of luck, you see. And that's what's the matter with me. As for that swab, he's good and dead, he is," he added, indicating the man with the red cap. "He weren't no seaman, anyhow, and there's what want you to come from." "Well," I said, "I've come on board to take possession of this ship, Mr. Hans, and you will please to regard me as your captain until further notice." He looked at me sourly enough, but did not speak. Some of the color had come back to his cheeks, though he still looked very sick, and still continued to slip out and settle down as the ship banged about. "By the by," I continued, "I can't have these colors, Mr. Hans, and by your leave I'll strike 'em. Better none than these." And again dodging the boom, I ran to the color lines, handed down their cursed black flag, and chucked it overboard. "God save the king," said I, waving my cap. "And there's an end to Captain Silver." He watched me keenly and slyly, his chin all the while on his breast. "I reckon," he said at last, "I reckon, Captain Hawkins, you'll be kind to want to get ashore now. Suppose we talks." "Why, yes," says I, "with all my heart, Mr. Hans. Say on." And I went back to my meal with a good appetite. "This man," he began, nodding feebly to the corpse, "O'Brien were his name, rank Icelander. This man and me got the canvas on her, meaning for to sail her back. Well, he's dead now, he is, as dead as bilge, and who's to sail this ship, I don't see. Without I gives you a hint, huh? You ain't that man as far as I can't tell. Now look here, you gives me food and drink, and an old scarf or a anchor to tie me wound up, you do, and I'll tell you how to sail her, and that's about square all round, I take it." "I'll tell you one thing," says I. "I'm not going back to Captain Kidd's anchorage. I mean to get into North Inlet and beach her quietly there." "To be sure you did," he cried. "Why, I ain't such an infernal lubberer. After all, I can see, can't I? I've tried my fling, I have, and I lost. And it's you has the wind of me. North Inlet? Why, I haven't no choice, not I. I'd help you sail her up to execution dock, by thunder, so I would." Well, as it seemed to me, there was some sense in this. We struck our bargain on the spot. In 3 minutes I had the Hispaniola sailing easily before the wind along the coast of Treasure Island, with good hopes of turning the northern point ere noon, and beating down again as far as North Inlet before high water, when we might beach her safely, and wait until the subsiding tide permitted us to land. And then I lashed the tiller and went below to my own chest, where I got a soft silk handkerchief of my mother's. With this, and with my aid, Hans bound up the great bleeding stab he had received in the thigh, and after he'd eaten a bit and had a swallow or two more of the brandy, he began to pick up visibly, sat straighter up, spoke louder and clearer, and looked in every way another man. The breeze served us admirably. We skimmed before it like a bird, and the coast of the island was flashing by, and the view changing every minute. Soon we were past the high lands, and bowling beside low, sandy country, sparsely dotted with dwarf pines, and soon we were beyond that again, and had turned the corner of the rocky hill that ends the island on the north. I was greatly elated with my new command, and pleased with the bright, sunshiny weather and these different prospects of the coast. I had now plenty of water and good things to eat, and my conscience, which had smitten me hard for my desertion, was quieted by the great conquest I had made. I should, I think, have had nothing left me to desire but for the eyes of the coxswain, as they followed me derisively about the deck, and the odd smile that appeared continually on his face. It was a smile that had in it something both of pain and weakness, a haggard old man's smile, but there was, besides that, a grain of derision, a shadow of treachery in his expression, as he craftily watched, and watched, and watched me at my work. Thanks everybody who may have been by, but either way, if you're seeing this later, I hope you like and subscribe if you want to see more of these in the future. Bye everyone.